Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at mobile app development. I'm Tim Bornholt. Let's get nerdy. So up to this point, it's been me and Rob, my business partner, and we've been working on a few episodes that are what we in the biz would call evergreen content, where it's going to be knowledge, tips, things that are going to be generally applicable to all apps. Ultimately, what we wanted to turn this show into was more of an interview with other successful app producers, founders, people that have a wide range of experience that can apply to people who are trying to get into this space that aren't necessarily technical. So to that end, we are going to start this series with our good friends over at Kwikly. Pedram, Nastaean, and Yomiyu Hirpa are the founders, and they are two just crazy successful guys. When you talk with them, you just get this vibe that they have it all together. And if they don't, then they're fooling me. They run a company called Kwikly, which is a on-demand dental staffing agency, which basically pairs up dental offices who are looking for a hygienist in real time. They can make a request, and then Kwikly has this network of hygienists that have apps on their phones, and anytime a job gets posted, a push notification goes out to all their contractors to say, hey, pick up the shift, and then someone can take it, and then they go in, clock out, get paid, and it's kind of like the Uber for dental staffing. So in this episode, Pedram and Yomiyu and myself, we discuss how to start a company without any technical knowledge, how much drive you need in order to make it in this app space. We talk about some of the lessons they've learned from past ventures and how they've applied it to become one of the premier dental staffing solutions in the country. So without further ado, here's my episode with Pedram, Nastaean, and Yomiyu Hirpa of Kwikly. Pedram and Yomiyu, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having us, Tim. Glad to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, really happy to have you guys on as our first guest on Constant Variables here, besides Rob, but nobody likes him anymore, so we'll just be rolling with you guys. So we've been working together on Kwikly now for a couple of years almost. And I know your story, but I thought it'd be beneficial to have everybody kind of hear what your backstory, and we'll just kind of go through your history, how you came up with the idea for Kwikly, and where you're at now. And I think the whole point, the reason I really wanted you guys on the show was because you guys come at this from a unique perspective of not necessarily having that technical background. So I think your insights are going to be valuable here. So my first question for you guys is, how did you guys meet? How did you guys become friends?
Well, it's kind of a long, funny story. So we started playing soccer together way back when. I think it was even before high school. And we would play in these different games. And I was from Andover, and Yomiyu is actually from Anoka, and we're kind of rival, cities. And we started off as kind of hating each other. And this guy just kept kind of popping up left and right. So I'd see him in my classes at some point and college, and then we ended up getting a part-time gig together. And we started realizing that we kind of have more in common than we thought. And we just kind of started becoming friends is really the real story behind it. Yomi, does that sound right?
Yeah, that's right on par. It seems like wherever I went, I'd see Pedram, and it was definitely unplanned, but it's just kept on crossing paths, and like Pedram mentioned, and we found out that we had a lot more in common than we initially thought, but here we are today.
It's funny how that works sometimes, where you get a bad first impression of somebody, and then just over time they wear you down, and you just become best friends. And that's really funny how that happens.
Yeah.
For you guys, what entrepreneurial experience did you have before you jumped into Kwikly? I think you had another startup attempt before this idea, right?
Yeah,
yes,
we actually were working on some parking automation software in the past, but I can speak for myself at least when I say that the entrepreneurial spirit in me dates back to childhood. I was always selling Kool-Aid or water bottles at various events, just trying to make a little bit of extra money.
Is that same for you, Pedram? Have you always had the entrepreneurial bug?
I wish I could say that too, but I was never like that. No, until I think just Recently to our last startup attempt, that's really when I kind of started liking, entrepreneurship and liking, building something to make things better. That's kind of when it started.
What so with having that in mind, it's interesting that you come at it from the perspective of not really having that entrepreneurial background, because I didn't either. Jumping into a business, it was just like, running a business, that's a thing we could probably do. Right. So it's interesting having that partnership. What lessons, Yomiyu, this might be more for you than Pedram, but coming in from that previous venture, what lessons did you learn from that helped you when you were coming up with your new partnership together?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just making sure that you build something that people want. People like to call that market validation or product market fit. Just ensuring that like what you do build is something that people are going to use, because people always have ideas that they think are great, and oftentimes they are, but you just need to make sure that idea applies to not only you, but a pool of people that you can service as well.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Yomiyu. We learned a lot during our first startup attempt, I would say. So we were trying to automate these parking, ticketing systems in the cities, which would in turn, have better traffic flow for the city and help people find more parking spots, because that's just such a hassle these days. When you're driving down, it seems like I always have to go down a few blocks before I find a parking spot, or end up walking, farther than I want to. And we would do things like go down to the city in the middle of summer at different times and kind of survey these parking spots and see how many people are over parking, and see how many times there is an open parking spot at different times. And that really taught us to do the research in your market. And then when we actually got that data, we started learning things that we didn't even know before. So our assumptions that we had weren't necessarily correct. And that's kind of part of the reason why we ended up moving on to Kwikly, because that startup was struggling. Our idea was good, but it was a hard execution. So we decided to kind of wrap it up and move on to another thing.
That makes sense. Sometimes that's one of the biggest lessons you can learn, is when to call it quits, because you don't want to spend your time spinning your tires in the mud if there's another opportunity that is a little more golden down the road.
Right.
So speaking of coming up with Kwikly, how did you guys come up with that idea? How did you go from parking validation and ticketing all the way up to dental staffing? That doesn't seem like a very linear path.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. So during the same time that we're working on it, we're trying to build this, parking software startup. I actually have some family in dental staffing, and they would kind of tell me about these different issues that were in the industry, just here and there, and I wouldn't really think too much about it until one day it kind of struck a chord with me, and I was like, well, tell me more, what's really going on? And my mom, who was actually a dental temp at the time, was telling me how these dental practices had a hard time finding temporary staff, or they couldn't get staff in time. And we started talking to different people in the industry. So we started interviewing a bunch of hygienists who used to be temps or are currently temps, and seeing how it is for them. And then we also talked to dental offices who are on the other side of things, dealing with these, kind of outdated staffing agencies. And it was just the same theme throughout the whole time, right? So it was really inefficient processes, outdated methods, staffing agencies using phone calls and emails to try to place professionals, which just seems like something out of, the 80s. And I told Yomiyu about this, and I was like, I cannot believe that these guys are still, calling professionals to try to place them for jobs. And I was like, hey, we can do a lot better than what they're doing. Let's give it a shot. And that's kind of how it started.
That's awesome. It's great that you were able to find a pain point that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have the old saying of if you can scratch the itch yourself, those are the best ideas. And sometimes that you have to kind of go the opposite direction and just open your eyes and see other people's pain points. It takes a lot of empathy to do that. And it's cool that you just had the idea to jump in and help that. Yomiyu, were you on board right away as soon as Pedram said that, or did it take a little convincing?
Yeah, so it did take a little bit of convincing. I noticed that Pedram's mom had mentioned these things, but after reaching out to various hygienists, it just made sense that this is something that we should pursue.
It's like I said, it's great that you guys were able to keep your eyes open for that opportunity, because it's a lot of people have good ideas that might not necessarily have great market fit, but to be able to see an obvious pain point and be able to come up with a technical solution to that problem, that's really cool.
For sure.
Yeah.
You guys don't, when we were talking about your background, there wasn't a lot of talk of, you guys have been coding for years and you have a huge depth of knowledge with technology. So I'm curious, how did you end up coming to the idea of building an app and finding a team to put all that together? What was that process like for you?
So to answer the first part of that question, how did we really develop the vision to build an app? I think it just kind of made sense. We see these models of business everywhere. It's kind of becoming a reoccurring theme with a lot of businesses these days, from Uber to Lyft and even Postmates doing food delivery. The sharing economy is something that is really going to be the future of this world.
And it's funny because we've, like you said, Tim, we really had no tech background. I mean, we didn't understand, what the front end was, what the back end was. We didn't know, how a server operated, nothing. So when we came into this, we were just really picking up things and learning on the fly, right? So we would go to different networking events and we would talk to people about how they've built their apps, and we would ask them for advice, really. So we'd meet someone and he'd be like, yeah, hey, I just launched my MVP. And we were like, well, what's that? And how did you go about doing that? And he'd be like, yep, start off by wireframing. And then we'd have to figure out what wireframing was. And I actually remember the first time we were trying to learn how to wireframe an app, we went down to the university library and we spent 2 or 3 hours looking for different books and different kind of sketches on how to wireframe. And we still didn't understand it. I don't know if it was just us or what it was, but eventually we ended up working with another friend of ours who's kind of a little bit more familiar with this kind of stuff. And he started showing us a little bit more on the technical side of things, how to wireframe these things out, how, the UI, UX of an app should look. And then we just started kind of picking it up as we went.
Man, that's awesome. It's really rare to see that. Like, a lot of people have an idea for something, but to actually drive down to the library and do 3 hours of research on something that you don't have an idea on, that it seems like you guys have a lot of natural curiosity for how things work. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think curiosity is really important. I think that as you grow and as you develop as a human, I think it's essential to keep that curiosity aspect in your life. It's just, it's imperative.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to kind of learn more about tech too. It was so fascinating to me how these things work. And I didn't understand anything about it at first. And I'm so happy that I kind of ended up going down this route, because now I feel like I definitely understand kind of more than the average person about these things. And it's just awesome. I love it. So
it's got to be nice to have the ability to demystify things, because I think that's one thing that my job more often than not is to explain things, like the technical things, where like wireframes. I remember when we had a conversation a while back where when you were talking about those wireframes and how I threw out the term wireframe because I have heard it every day for the last 6 years. And so you throw out these terms where you're just like, oh, they'll know what a wireframe is. But then to hear that you guys actually had to go, and it's something I could have spent 5 minutes explaining and you'd have been like, oh, okay. But it's one of those things like technology. Everyone thinks it's so unapproachable. And for you guys to actually sit down and actually learn what you need to learn, it's not like you guys are in the code necessarily, but that enough to talk the lingo and to be able to know where a problem lies and how you can fix it. I think it's really important as someone in your guys' position as the owners of a technical product.
Definitely. I completely agree.
So when you guys approached us first, I'm just curious, when you pick a technical team, a lot of people will either find like a technical co-founder, which Yomiyu, I think your cousin was kind of played that advisory role, but didn't actually do any of the development on it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, he had his experience with databases, so he's kind of able to help in like the early stages and just kind of point us out in the right direction and kind of just things to look for and what makes a good team. And he deals with a lot of developers too, so he's kind of a great resource in that aspect.
Yeah, it's good to have a good technical friend in your back pocket.
Definitely. And Tim, I guess it's noteworthy to say that you guys were not the first people we reached out to. You were kind of actually, I think, the last person, and then the person that struck the biggest, chord with us. But before you, we actually reached out to a lot of different firms from all over the place, right? We didn't know anything about anything. So we were reaching out to web design firms. And another thing that was just super, simple, but we didn't understand was, what's the difference between web design and development? Or is it the same thing? Because there's firms that are saying they do both design and development. Well, right now, we've been told to do the design first. So which one is first, right? So we'd reach out to all these different firms. We even reached out to some overseas firms. And we talked to a lot of different people about how, we're going to go ahead, how we're going to develop this product, timelines, different kind of pricing structures, different features. And then when we kind of started talking with you guys, I felt like, Tim, you did the best job. And I swear they're not paying me to say this. But I felt like Tim did the best job in kind of understanding our product and laying out just a solid plan on how we're going to execute. And that's where we felt the most comfortable with, I should say.
And it did help that they were locally too, so you could always check in and see what's going on, and didn't have to deal with someone that was in a different time zone or different part of the world. So that was really cool.
Well, that's awesome. Your guys' checks are in the mail for those kind words. So it's interesting though, because I think it's fascinating from my end of somebody who's trying to find people like you that have the idea and the just tenacity to get the project done. I think it's like we're both kind of wandering in the dark trying to find each other. And so it's interesting to hear, you can, like I said, you can have a technical co-founder friend that can do everything for you. Or if you don't have that, then the next step is, well, how do you begin? Do you go find, somebody that's out of college that you can bring on equity? Do you go out and pay a huge development shop, a big agency, a small agency? Do you go overseas? I'm curious how you guys came to settle on choosing like going for an agency rather than say piecing together, I have a Rails guy here and I have an iOS developer here. Like, I'm curious to hear how you guys came to that decision.
Yep, that is a great question. So originally we thought about doing, individual developers or going overseas, but we really wanted this product to be solid, right? And we said, hey, let's find, a team that can do this, because if you're finding one backend developer, then you got to look for a mobile developer. And we were building on 3 different platforms, right? So we had iOS, the Android side, and then also the Office dashboard, or kind of the web side of things. So we wanted a team to be able to handle that, and we knew that it would be difficult for one person to do everything. And we thought if we could find someone who is specialized in each side, that would be a lot easier for our product. And we decided to go that route, even if it would be a little bit more expensive than going overseas, because we thought we trusted it more, is what I should say.
And not that, we just really wanted to do it right the first time around. Mm-hmm. And it's going to cost you both time and money to do things a second time around if you need to scrap everything and go back and do everything again. So like Pedram said, like just having an emphasis on having a team and making sure we did it right the first time around was right. A prerogative, right. I thought.
And I guess the other thing that I would kind of say, in my own experience, try to do as much as you can up front by yourself. Right. So if you have to sit and wireframe things out, pencil, paper, do that, because it'll give you an understanding of how things work, and you'll be able to work with that team or even your technical co-founder that much better. So if we would have took just, all the money that we had and threw it at a development firm and said, hey, you guys just run with this, I don't think we would have learned nearly as much as, what we did was we sat down, we wireframed everything out. And we just kept on reiterating each time, right? So we're like, this screen doesn't look good. Let's retry it. Let's redo it. or maybe we can move these features somewhere else for a different time. And that's when we approached, the JMG firm, is when we had kind of our plan of what we wanted, and they were really able to bring in their expertise and help us craft that to build the product we have right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's nice when you if you approach a firm that you just have the bones of the idea. I mean, not even the bones. If you just have the idea, but you don't have any of the structure or a plan to put things in place, you're definitely going to end up paying more to have them come up with the idea or the execution, the plan, and that might not even match your vision ultimately. Mm-hmm. If you can't come to them and say, this is what I want, and then be able to find somebody that can understand your vision and execute on that does make things more challenging.
Exactly.
What challenges? So, I mean, obviously we were perfect. There was no issues with JMG at all during development, but hypothetically, no, there's always roadblocks with huge projects. What challenges did you see working with a third party agency that wasn't necessarily, you guys as the core founders? What challenges did you guys come up across?
So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is making sure that your vision is aligned with everyone and you guys are working towards the same thing. Because like you mentioned, it'd be a really bad situation to have to redo something because you weren't clear on how you wanted something to be built in the forefront. I think that's probably one of the bigger things I would say. Yeah.
And I think adding on to what Yomiyu is saying is having your set of features that you want almost in stone, right? I mean, things are always changing, but when you develop half of the app and then you go and change your mind on a feature, that's where things start to kind of get messy because you're trying to add different features in, and the development team has to go back in and change that, and you're just extending this timeline. So my advice is to do as much work as you can up front, as much market research, and kind of come up with these bare bones features that you need. And kind of stick with that throughout your development process.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, now that if we're going through this timeline here, so you've gotten, you had the idea, we built out the project, you've got usage now, right? Like what does a day in the life of Pedram and Yomiyu look like? How do you manage this tech stack now that it exists?
I mean, the biggest thing right now is just getting exposure. We recently launched in Minnesota a couple months ago, and we've been getting a lot of traction here and a lot of acclaim from both the professionals in the offices that do use our services. But at this stage in the game, it's really just brand awareness and getting our name out there and getting this in front of the people's eyes who would find it valuable.
Yeah. And our goal is really, we're looking to take Kwikly nationwide at some point. And we're looking for some key partners in different areas who would be able to help us out. So an ambassador of some sort who would be open to, having our product launch in their area. So if that's you, feel free to reach out to us. Tim, if you don't mind just dropping our contact information below, we'd love to speak with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll make sure that's in the show notes. So I'm also curious. So from the day-to-day side of things, you guys are actively, obviously, pushing the platform, trying to get more hygienists and more professionals that are on that side of the equation, and you also are trying to balance that out with the amount of demand from the offices. From the technical side, how do you continue to evolve the platform, and what are you emphasizing? While obviously, like you guys said, you have your features set in stone to launch, but then that doesn't mean necessarily that you're done. So how do you balance the want for throwing more things into the platform to improve your product while also understanding budgets and timelines and all that?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I would say we have pretty much a list for all the bells and whistles that we want. And then we also have a list for all of the real kind of necessary things that need to happen. And those come directly from the customers. So, I mean, we think of those things as well as they come along, but it's mostly from customer complaints, or if we had an incident that's happened and we're trying to prevent that from happening again, that's where we start introducing these different type of features, or maybe we're putting some security features in place to protect the platform. But a lot of these bells and whistles, we kind of try to put on the back burner until people are actually asking for them. So you never know if this feature in your app is actually going to make a difference for your user and whether or not it's going to move the needle or not.
And the biggest thing with tech too is it's always evolving. So to say that once you've built something, you're never going to make any adjustments or any updates to it is very naive. I think the thing with tech is it's always evolving, it's always growing, and it's always changing.
Great point. What so I'm curious also, what advice would you have for somebody who they want to get they want to follow your shoes, basically. They have an idea, they want to build the app, but they're not really technically savvy. What advice would you guys give them in order to make sure that they have the best chance at success?
I think just doing it as lean as possible. Pedram mentioned this earlier. If you can do most of the legwork up front, that'll really put you in a good position when the time for development does arise. You'll have a deeper understanding of the product, and not only that, but you'll learn a lot as well.
Exactly. And I think even the other thing going before that is figuring out, like Yomiyu said, kind of in the beginning, if people actually want to use your product, and how you are going to, monetize your product as well. Because a lot of people have kind of cool ideas, but what's the model for your product, and are people actually willing to use it? That's kind of a different story. So I would say to do a lot of research up front, because developing apps is not cheap. So you want to make sure that your dollars are not being wasted, and you know what you're getting into when you start that development.
Exactly. And the last thing too, just make sure you have a clearly defined vision and a focus. There's people out there wanting to build things for the world, and they don't understand that sometimes that's a lot of marketing dollars to get that in front of everybody. But if you have a niche that you're going after, we've had a lot of success with that.
It's fantastic. There's it seems like you guys are really onto something with this platform, and I'm really excited to see how Kwikly evolves here over the next few years. And I'm just, it's great to see that people don't necessarily need to have a computer science degree in order to build a business that's based around technical apps. You can really, it seemed like everything you guys were saying for advice is not necessarily go out and learn Java or whatever. It's sit down and learn business. And then from there, the app side of stuff, you can pick that up as you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. I mean, that's really what it was in our experience.
Right on.
And I mean, if you want to learn a little bit of Java, it definitely won't hurt though.
Yeah, maybe a different language, not Java, but
maybe not Java. Yeah.
So do you guys have anything you want to ask? I know you already mentioned if there's any partners nationwide that would want to work with Kwikly, but is there anything else that you want to say, or how can people get in touch with you and find out more about you guys and what you're doing over at Kwikly?
Yeah, the best way to kind of keep up to date on what's going on at Kwikly is to kind of follow our Facebook, and that is Join Kwikly, our facebook.com/Join Kwikly, and that's spelled JoinKwikly. You'll see the latest updates there. If you do want to get in contact with either Pedram or myself, you can always contact the support email or my personal email. I'll have Tim drop that in the description.
Excellent. Well, guys, thanks for being the first guest on the show. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you guys continued success over on your end.
Tim, thanks so much for having us.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim. It was a pleasure to be here, and it was really neat talking about Kwikly, and hopefully we're able to help a couple founders in the future here.
Right on. Thanks, guys. My guests today were Pedram, Nastaean, and Yomiyu Hirpa of Kwikly. You can learn more about them by heading to www.joinkwikly.com or by going on Facebook, type in Join Kwikly, and you will find out all there is to know about their incredible dental staffing agency that is all done over mobile apps. Show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with us by emailing hello@constantvariables.co. I'm at Tim Bornholt on Twitter. You can also reach me there. Today's episode was edited by the fastidious Jordan Doust. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group, who builds mobile software solutions for the on-demand economy. Learn more at jmg.mn.